Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so glad to have you here. Not so long ago, public education was solely focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Times, though, are changing. Youngsters today are often using technology, even before they're talking. Those in education are constantly having to adapt and change with the times. However, some of the adjustments in curriculum, it's ruffling some feathers. We're going to talk about some of the shifts happening right here in New Jersey with a former lawmaker and candidate for governor, John Wisniewski, as well as a current state senator. Senator Joe Pennacchio is a Republican who served in the New Jersey Senate since 2008. He represents the 26th Legislative District, which takes in parts of Essex, Morris, and Passaic counties. Senator Joe Pennacchio has 5 bills that look at education in the state of New Jersey and address issues from transparency to what should or should not be taught in the classroom. Senator, it's so good to see you.
Thank you for having me on, Laura.
Absolutely. All right, so you have 5 different bills, and let's take them one by one. One would require schools to make curriculum plans available to parents and the public. This seems like it is a very reasonable request. How's it being met?
Well, we don't know. They're all out there and they're still waiting for a hearing. All too often we hear, especially from educators, we have to get the parents involved. Well, you have to get the parents involved means you have to let them know what's going on. So certainly what's being taught in school, the books that are being used, that way the parents don't have any surprises. I think that's a very fair approach to it, very transparent and sort of leads to more accountability than may be existing right now, Laura.
Yeah. One of the things that I found as a parent, because we have more school districts than we do municipalities, is that you don't have consistency. So what may be happening at the elementary isn't always posted on the middle school, and some schools might have everything, all of the books, all of the curriculum posted. So are you looking to do something that would be consistent across the state, some type of template, so that if you're looking in Hunterdon County, it would be a similar kind of a template if you were looking in Mercer?
I think the bill addresses school boards. So
Okay.
each individual school boards will be responsible. If they have K through 12, great. If they just have grammar schools or middle schools, then whatever their purview is. And obviously the curriculum for first grade is different for second, third, and fourth, and the books that they use are also different. But again, the parents, by the way, have a right to know.
Well, that's it. And it's not necessarily because we're checking up on teachers. I myself as a parent, I just wanted to know the books or the information so when my child comes home, I could help them, because the way things are taught now are different than they were taught 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago. So it's not necessarily because you're checking up on teachers. It's because you want to. I know I wanted to be a partner in education.
Well, you can't have it both ways. Educators can say that, we're not a mom and dads, we need parental involvement on one hand, and then the other hand, they say, well, you're checking up on us. Well, first of all, we have a right to check up on what goes on with our children. But again, getting parental involvement, in my view, only could lead to good things.
Another area where people can get involved is by showing up to their Board of Education meetings, and a lot of people are doing that now more than ever. But another part of the package of bills you're sponsoring would require the Board of Education to post a meeting schedule at least 48 hours in advance. Now, I thought that this was already required. If you're having a public meeting, you have to give notice.
Again, it's how they give notice. They could put it in a little blurb in a local newspaper. I think the bill is specific that it has to be online where all parents could see it. Most schools do it, by the way, that's my understanding. But this, again, just codifies the fact that parents have a right to know. If they want to show up and express themselves in a good or negative way as to what's going on in the curriculum and within those schools, then at least they'll know when to show up. That is actually born out of an issue that happened in Randolph, where parents were surprised that all of a sudden they got rid of Columbus Day and then they got rid of some other holidays. If the parents had known beforehand, maybe you wouldn't have had 1,000 screaming parents showing up at school board meeting complaining that this is all new to them. So again, this is an issue of transparency for me. And again, parental rights. Parents have a right to know exactly what's going on in those classrooms.
Yeah, well, when you talk about parents having a right to know, you also want a bill that it would increase transparency as far as state funding in public schools. In other words, kind of a follow the money bill. You know, you have high property taxes. Where the heck is the money going? Parents typically can't. It's very difficult to be able to peek inside to see where is all the money going.
Well, we have that bill, by the way, was introduced, I think, 10 years ago, and actually passed the state Senate, and then just got bottlenecked and never had a hearing in the Assembly. And any argument that they would use against it, in my view, is specious. We live in a day and age where everything can be linked to a computer in real time. And I think taxpayers have a right to know. And that bill, even though school boards are involved, it involves all levels of government, even New York City and the Port Authorities and other authorities that were involved. Whoever spends a taxpayer dollar should have a right to know how that dollar is being spent. And with respect to schools, it's sort of important because you said it, you have to follow the money. They may try to hide, the purchase of certain books, or change the way that it's represented to you, but the computer doesn't lie. If you have an invoice that you're paying for, X number of books, you'd like to know what those books are.
Right. And do most people, I would imagine, would support something like that? I mean, we pay the highest property taxes, and the majority of those property taxes, it does go to our public schools.
Exactly. In my district, the average between 60 and 75%. When we had hearings at the Senate Budget Committee on this bill and it passed, we were told that, I think going back 10 years ago, the cost was about $200 million, I think, to do the entire state of New Jersey with all those authorities and all the school boards that we're talking about, as well as all the levels of government. And it could be done, quote, in-house. So we're not talking about, and again, this is a right that taxpayers have a right to know. If somebody's asking you to spend $1, I think you have an absolute right to know how that dollar is going to be spent, when it's spent in real time. And we have that ability to do it right now. Yeah. We had it 10 years ago, so now it should be easier. Quite frankly, it may even cost less.
Yeah, and a lot of people, you have a support from both sides on that, but an area where it gets a little bit dicier and where some feathers are getting ruffled is a bill that would remove a requirement to teach diversity-related instruction. Can you talk exactly about what type of diversity-related instruction that you would want removed, the requirement removed?
Well, it doesn't remove the diversity instructions. It just says you shouldn't be teaching 4 and 5-year-olds who have an unconscious bias. That's the bill. The bill says what the bill says. You shouldn't be teaching them about sexual identity and sexual orientation. These are kids that are still believing in Santa Claus and still believing in the Tooth Fairy. Quite frankly, they shouldn't be subjected to this. And certainly if they're going to be subjected, the parents have a right to know. What the bill that I dropped in says that you can teach that. Originally, that bill was supposed to be in high school, taught in high school as part of the sex education, whatever they're teaching in high school. And then it was actually amended to include kindergarten, 4 and 5-year-olds. So we tried to unamend it to say, no, bring it back to high school. There's nothing in the bill that says you can't teach, all the mosaic that makes up this beautiful community of people that we live with in this state. But I think we should have some pause when we're thinking about how we talk to our 4 and 5-year-olds when it comes to sexual identity and sexual orientation, which quite frankly, they don't have a clue. And the fact that they're saying that these children have an unconscious bias, they couldn't even clean snow off the street. How did they excavate the psyche of these 4 and 5-year-olds to let us know that they have an unconscious bias? I think that's abhorrent.
Young people are exposed to technology sometimes before they can even speak. They have their different devices. So what happens, though, if you have a young person, K through 2nd grade, who has a question because they saw it on YouTube, or maybe they have an older brother or sister, and educators need a little bit of guidance in how do you address that?
Well, unfortunately, the guidance that the educators are getting now is not right. Those issues that you had just mentioned should be handled, in my view, at home. 4 and 5-year-old has a question about a sexual identity or sexual orientation. That's a question that should be talked about between parents and guardians and the young children. You don't subject the entire classroom. And then if a teacher doesn't feel comfortable, or if a teacher wants to express herself to that child when the child asks a question, the first thing they should do is call the parent and say, you know, little Johnny, little Mary has a question about sexual orientation. Would you like me to continue that conversation with them? I think that's very fair. In the meantime, when kids are older and they can understand what these issues are and how they relate, you know, to who they are and who they may be and others that surround them, that should be taught at a higher grade level. I think certainly high school. So again, the bill that we says, all that does is just take away the fact that you're teaching these 4 and 5-year-olds these type of issues when it comes to sexual orientation and sexual identity. And it gets rid of the word unconscious bias, because for the life of me, I can't figure out how somebody could, in good faith, put that in the bill where they can actually determine that a 4 or 5-year-old has an unconscious bias.
One other bill that you are proposing would prohibit teachers from advocating a political belief. So can you help me understand what defines a political belief?
Well, I think that's part of a CRT bill, and you know it's upsetting people because initially CRT didn't exist, remember? And then CRT did exist, which is critical race theory, and that includes the whole woke generation. You know, that one group of people, because of systemic racism and systemic injustices, is allowed to step over another group of people that had nothing to do with that in order for them to get themselves better. No, we have no glass ceilings. The bill that myself and Senator Tester have dropped in, and I credit Senator Tester for doing this. It was very well thought out. Please go read the bill. There's nothing in that bill that is contrary to what our American values have been for the last 250 years. All we're saying is that, you know, you should take yourself as high and as far as your talents and your imagination will let you, but you can't step over other people in the meantime when you're trying to do that.
State Senator Joe Pennacchio, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to talk a little bit more about these package of bills that you're proposing. We hope you come back on to let us know how they are progressing.
Thank you for having me on, Laura.
We've heard one Republican's passionate take on a number of issues, so where are the Democrats? Let's bring in former state lawmaker and past candidate for governor, Democrat John Wisniewski. So good to see you here.
Laura, good to be with you.
Okay, so we had Senator Joe Pennacchio talking a lot about issues related to transparency in schools, but the one that seems to be getting so much where people are really divided and their feathers seem to be ruffled has to do with the requirement that would remove diversity training. So in other words, a lot of people do not want second graders hearing things about gender identity. So what is your take?
Well, we live in a diverse world, and one of the roles of our primary education system is to prepare our young people to live in the world as it is, not in the world that used to be or a world that we philosophically hope to be, to put them in a real world situation. And so making sure that our young boys and girls have an age appropriate understanding of the concepts that frankly, they are probably seeing before their parents see them. Let's recognize the fact that, you know, the legislators who are talking about making sure children aren't educated in a certain way in school are ignoring the fact that these children are probably far more savvy in using the internet and are seeing and being exposed to things that they don't understand on their own. And they need to have an age appropriate way of understanding the concepts that they're confronting in real time. And so, you know, I think what Jersey Joe is trying to do is you know, it's a nostalgia tour. He's trying to take the world back to a place that doesn't exist, a place that, you know, had a lot of bigotry and a lot of discrimination in it. And frankly, I think he's trying to channel Glenn Youngkin as, you know, trying to make education policy some kind of stepping stone for future political ambition.
I think you hit a very important point, and that is age appropriateness. I've said before that children, a lot of times they have tablets before they're able to read. They're looking at videos, and they may accidentally, or they have an older brother or sister, and they are exposed to this information. So, parents, they don't want to rob their children of their childhood. So how do you strike that balance between protecting that innocence and also focusing on the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and also addressing, hey, they are exposed to some things that might be very confusing?
Well, I think one of the fundamental issues that even educators would agree about with a 180-day school year and an expanding list of mandated instruction, something's got to give, right? There's just simply not that much time left in a school year to start adding things. And so we have to be very careful about what we add, how we add it, the amount of time that's required. And I agree with you, Laura. I mean, it's got to be age appropriate, but we also need to recognize the world we live in today, the words and the phrases and the concepts that our children are exposed to, and they ought to have a trusted person helping them navigate and understand the world they live in today. And that's what this is about. Parents have the ability to opt their children out. Parents have an ability to be involved in the school district. I mean, that's why we have 611 school districts in New Jersey, because we have this very strongly held belief that education emanates locally, that local school boards need to be in control of what local children are being taught. And so this is, in part, the need for an exercise in democracy. If parents feel that they need to have more say, then go to the Board of Ed meeting, make your voices heard, make them heard in a rational, coherent way. But when you look online and you read Fox News articles about what this issue is, it's totally misrepresented, and it's done in an incendiary way. I mean, there was one article that talked about a range of possible lesson plans being given to parents in Westfield. But what did Fox News do? They focused on one out of many, and they made that into the standard that the Board of Ed was talking about, which is totally untrue.
Yeah, I think it's always important consider the source. But it is a lot to put on parents because they are bombarded with so much information, and what do they believe? And a lot of Board of Eds are very much divided. But you're saying that parents do have the option to opt out of these lesson plans if they are concerned.
That's what the law is today. And let's recognize that parents are overwhelmed these days. I mean, not only both parents working to earn a living to provide for their families, so the bandwidth and the limitations that they have, it's understandable that there's a sense of frustration. But I think that sense of frustration is played upon. It's used as a political tool by unscrupulous politicians who want to make a name for themselves instead of actually understanding the issue.
Yeah. So your advice: stop reading news reports, go directly to your Board of Education, go to your local school district and read and ask the teachers, what are you teaching?
Well, I just clarify one thing. Don't stop reading news reports, but read a variety of them. Dig into it. Don't just read Fox and say, that's it, that's the story. NJ.com could have a different viewpoint. And, if you go online and you look at where this story is focused, right, you see it in all conservative outlets. You don't see it anywhere else. So you know that this is a culture war issue. This is not a factual issue. This is a political issue.
Yeah, it is very frustrating that so much of education has become very politicized in the past couple of years during COVID, which is kind of transitioning me into the issue of COVID and the funds that we received here in New Jersey. New Jersey's legislature, they're concerned that the Governor Phil Murphy, is trying to take full control of the money to use as he wishes, as opposed to letting the legislature have a say. Fill us in on what's going on there.
Well, every year the governor makes a budget address, and in it the governor proposes how he'd like to spend the money that New Jersey receives both from tax revenue and from the federal government. And in this particular budget year, the one he's proposing for fiscal year 2023, he eliminated the language that gave the governor and the legislature joint control over $3 billion in COVID relief funds. And so the implication from what he's proposed is that the governor is going to have unilateral control over it. Now, look, I think there's a couple of things that are really obvious in this. Is number one, New Jersey's governor, just the way we have created the office of governor in New Jersey, has far too much power. And it makes the legislature very much at a disadvantage in negotiating with the governor. And I think constitutionally, we need to look at that and re-examine that. But the legislature needs to step up and exert its role, its constitutionally mandated role. The legislature appropriates the money that the executive spends. And that money that came in for COVID relief, I think one of the things that we need to be looking at for the state of New Jersey is future resiliency. This is not the last pandemic that's going to hit the state. We don't know when the next one will be, but we ought to make sure that New Jersey has the kind of infrastructure and the kind of surveillance and the kind of testing that's necessary to protect our state when the next one does hit.
We hear a lot at times about New Jersey's governor as one of the most powerful, especially before we had a lieutenant governor, and that governor could also be the Senate. The Senate president could also be acting governor. But, constitutionally, you are supposed to have 3 equal branches of government. So what is it still that gives New Jersey's governor so much power to where the legislature can't say, you know what, Governor, no, these $3 billion, no, we represent our constituents, and this is how it's going to go. What is it about his powers that maybe those watching are not understanding?
Well, certainly the governor needs to get 41 assembly members, 21 senators to agree with his decision to give himself unilateral control over these funds. Now, that's not impossible. There are Democratic majorities in both houses, and he just needs to get 41 and 21. And what makes the governor so powerful, and what makes it at least possible for him to do that, despite well-intentioned Senate chairs like Paul Sarlo saying that that's not acceptable, is the governor's appointment powers and the just the large breadth of what the governor can do gives him enormous negotiating power when it comes with the legislature. And the legislature needs to stand up and say, we are here to protect this money for the future of the state of New Jersey. New Jersey's budget right now is doing pretty well. We've got a lot of revenue. We've got a lot of cash. There's a lot of spending plans. You and I both know that will change. And sometimes for New Jersey, it changes before the state is ready for that change. And we need to make sure that we are keeping those resources available for the future, that we are using them to prepare the state for the future, and not just going on some kind of spending spree.
And then we have so many other projects that are outstanding and need to be taken care of. I know you talk a lot about Transportation Trust Fund, and I don't know if this relates, or the governor had proposed sending many people a rebate, $600 to $700. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, it's a good idea if you can repeat it each and every year. And let's not forget that $600 or $700 this year comes to about 7% of the average property tax bill. Unless it increases next year, it'll be 5%, and so on. And so that at some point in time, if property taxes just continue on a normal 2% path and that number doesn't increase, it becomes increasingly irrelevant. And so when the state of New Jersey embarks on this kind of program where we're going to help taxpayers pay their property tax, in order for it to be meaningful, it's got to be repeatable every single year, and it's got to increase every single year. And that's a tall order, and it ignores the elephant in the room that our tax system is broken, that we rely on local property taxes to fund education, and that's really a statewide mandate, and that's something that shouldn't be funded locally.
How in the world do you fix that?
It takes a lot of small steps. There is no one silver bullet to solve that property tax crisis, but there are lots of small steps. One, we have far too many layers of government in New Jersey, 1,300 units of local government, sometimes doing similar things, overlapping one another, 611 school districts when we only have 565 municipalities. There, therefore, is a lot of duplicate expenses that can be saved and can lower the cost of government. That's where you start.
All right. I always have to check the math myself. When you think of the number of school districts as opposed to the number of municipalities, it's like, how does that happen? Only in New Jersey. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and we look forward to having you back on again.
Thank you very much. Good being with you, and I look forward to it again.
Absolutely. This week in Trenton, New Jersey state lawmakers have been working on Governor Murphy's proposed budget. They'll continue hearings into May. Governor Phil Murphy announced there will be 2 groups of new state troopers next year to help prevent a shortage. Right now, there are 3,020 enlisted troopers, and the governor says the state needs more than 3,100. There are also more than 200 troopers eligible for retirement in the next 2 years.
The state police are the central point of contact for law enforcement entities across the state for tactical, technical, and forensic services. It is the clearinghouse for background checks and regulatory services for firearms and the private detective industry. The troopers here at The Rock are our front line in preparing for and managing our real-time response to storms, natural disasters, and as we all now are critically aware, to public health emergencies.
The cost to train an additional trooper class will be $9 million, with $4 million coming from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan. And that will do it for today. Thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we look forward to seeing you back here next time.